There's a global sporting event just 5 days away from kickoff, and the organization running it is already neck-deep in scandal, subpoenas, a ticketing glitch that handed out seats for free, and a growing chorus of voices telling the world to simply stay away from the country hosting most of its matches. And yet, threading through all that chaos, one of the co-host nations finds itself in a position it never fully anticipated. Not just as a participant, but as a beneficiary of everything going wrong for its neighbor. That country is Canada, and what's unfolding around the 2026 FIFA World Cup tells you something important, not just about soccer, but about how power, politics, and consumer protection law are reshaping one of the biggest sporting events in human history. Let's start with the core of the scandal, because the numbers alone are staggering. For the 2026 World Cup, FIFA abandoned price caps for matches held in the United States and Canada, a decision officials defended by claiming that price restrictions would simply drive buyers to third-party platforms like StubHub. That policy decision, dressed up in market logic, ended up lighting a very long fuse. The fallout was severe enough that New York Attorney General Letitia James and New Jersey Attorney General Jennifer Davenport issued formal subpoenas to FIFA as part of a joint investigation into the organization's ticketing practices. The probe is focused in particular on matches at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, where 8 games, including the final, are scheduled to be played. The attorneys general accused FIFA of creating what they called a gauntlet of confusion, fake scarcity, and impossibly high prices. That phrase is not the kind of language that comes out of a press release drafted by cautious legal teams looking for a quiet resolution. It is the language of a political confrontation. The legal pressure building around FIFA inside the United States is not a niche consumer complaint. It is a state-level investigation backed by subpoena power from 2 of the most influential attorneys general in the country. The investigation goes deeper than sticker shock. Authorities also looked into claims that FIFA altered seat maps mid-sale, bumping fans who paid for premium categories into less desirable locations than what was advertised at the time of purchase. The New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection joined the probe, with its commissioner calling the allegations of blatantly deceptive practices something his office would take very seriously. According to investigators, dynamic pricing allowed FIFA to raise prices on roughly 90 of the 104 matches by an average of 34% between different sales phases, all while publicly claiming that overwhelming demand was nearly exhausting supply. The price spiral at the heart of this probe did not happen quietly. Soccer's leading fan organizations demanded that FIFA immediately halt ticket sales, warning that prices approaching $9,000 for premium final seats would effectively lock out genuine supporters from the tournament. Football Supporters Europe, which described the pricing as extortionate, issued that call after national associations began circulating price lists showing costs up to 7 times higher than what fans paid for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. 7 times higher. That is not a modest premium justified by a more expensive host market. That is a structural decision to treat global soccer's most sacred event as a luxury commodity rather than a public spectacle. FIFA's own explanation, repeated by its president Gianni Infantino, was strikingly simple. They were simply adapting to the North American market. Adapting to the market, as if fans in Germany, Senegal, Iran, and Colombia, people who have followed their national teams for decades, should simply recalibrate their income expectations before boarding a flight to New Jersey. For context, face value seats at the 2022 World Cup final in Qatar range from around $200 to just over $1,600. For the 2026 final in New Jersey, the face value range runs from roughly $2,000 to more than $6,300. That is the official price before a single resale platform gets involved. FIFA responded to public pressure by releasing $60 tickets for an extremely small number of seats tucked into the highest corners of stadiums. It was a gesture designed more for optics than for access. The mechanics of how tickets were sold added its own layer of opacity. Even during last-minute sales windows, FIFA released tickets for various games at irregular intervals, while urging fans to act now, meaning someone logging in on any given day had no reliable way to know whether the tickets being offered were the last ones available, or whether more would appear later at lower prices. That architecture of uncertainty is not accidental. It is a design choice. Meanwhile, the illusion of scarcity was publicly dismantled by an academic. A Boston University economics professor named Florian Eder posted a seat map on X showing large, contiguous blocks of unsold tickets, directly undercutting FIFA's narrative about demand-draining supply. When an economist with a seat map can embarrass a global governing body in the week before a tournament opens, the credibility problem is not minor. It is foundational. Now, layer on top of that the glitch. A pricing error on FIFA's official ticketing platform listed certain Category 2 tickets for Canada's match in Toronto at a negative value of roughly $2,000. Fans who added other Toronto World Cup matches to their cart were able to let that negative balance offset their total, bringing the final charge to zero. Around 60 people discovered this, completed checkout, received confirmation emails, and quite reasonably believed they had secured a deal. FIFA contacted those fans shortly after, confirming the bookings had been canceled due to a payment processing error. Those 60 fans were then given just 7 days to pay the full original price or lose their seats entirely. The glitch landed at a particularly sensitive moment for an organization already fielding criticism over lengthy virtual queues, unclear availability updates, and dynamic pricing that had pushed certain match tickets into the thousands of dollars before most fans could even get through the waiting room. To complete the catalog of dysfunction, back in April, FIFA's official resale platform listed 4 seats for the final at MetLife Stadium at nearly $2.3 million each. 4 tickets to a sporting event, not a private island, not a piece of real estate, listed at prices exceeding the median home value in most North American cities. Whether through glitch or some form of market positioning, the signal to ordinary fans was unmistakable. This tournament was not built for you. All of this would be damaging enough to FIFA's reputation in any political environment. But the 2026 World Cup is not playing out in any political environment. It is playing out in Trump's America, and that context has transformed what might have been a consumer protection story into something with genuine geopolitical weight. This is where Canada's unexpected position begins to snap into focus. Amnesty International issued a formal warning detailing that the United States under President Trump is facing what it described as a human rights emergency, marked by discriminatory immigration policies, mass detentions, and arbitrary arrests by masked armed federal agents from ICE and other agencies. The organization specifically flagged that millions of soccer fans attending the 2026 World Cup risked coming face-to-face with what it called troubling attacks on human rights. That is not commentary from a partisan think tank. That is the world's most widely recognized human rights organization, formally flagging the primary host country of a major international sporting event as a site of active concern, weeks before the opening match. The Trump administration's proclamations restricting entry of nationals from 39 countries have added a direct, practical barrier to attendance. Fans from Ivory Coast, Haiti, Iran, and Senegal, all of which have qualified for the tournament, are subject to travel bans and will be legally unable to attend any World Cup matches on American soil unless they had already obtained visas before the ban went into effect. Think about that for a moment. 4 of the 48 nations in this tournament have fans who are legally barred from watching their team play in the majority of the host country. FIFA's president promised the most inclusive World Cup in history. The United States government has ensured that promise cannot be kept, at least not on its territory. A number of European lawmakers and prominent soccer figures have pointed to Trump's tariffs, his expansionist foreign policy statements, and the administration's aggressive immigration crackdown as reasons international fans should reconsider traveling to the United States. Those concerns have reached the highest levels of soccer's institutional memory. Former FIFA president Sepp Blatter cited an anti-corruption expert who had advised fans to stay away, adding that, upon arrival, anyone who failed to satisfy immigration officials could expect to be put straight on the next flight home. When a former FIFA president, a figure with his own complicated history, is publicly endorsing a boycott warning, the signal sent to the international soccer community is impossible to ignore. Reports that IBACE agents may attend FIFA matches to check spectators' proof of legal status have caused particular alarm. Swiss lawyer Mark Pieth, a specialist in white-collar crime and anti-corruption, framed it in the starkest terms. If we consider everything, there is only one piece of advice for fans: stay away from the USA. The German Soccer Federation's executive Oliver Bierhoff raised the question of a boycott publicly, saying he genuinely wondered when the time would come to think about it concretely, and that for him, that time had already arrived. No formal boycott has materialized. FIFA has enormous financial leverage over national federations, and none has yet been willing to sacrifice its participation. But the sentiment is real, it is widespread, and it is already redirecting fan decisions. A German fan told Reuters directly, "I am afraid I might not be allowed into the country. I have decided to fly to Canada at most, but not to the USA." That one quote carries a world of implication. A fan willing and qualified to attend the tournament, with the resources, time, and passion to travel internationally for soccer, is drawing a deliberate geographic line at the Canadian border. And that brings us to what Canada is actually positioned to gain, and to the genuinely complicated reality of what hosting this tournament truly costs. Canada is hosting 13 matches in total, split between Toronto and Vancouver. Toronto will host 6 matches, including Canada's opening game against Bosnia and Herzegovina, the first ever men's World Cup match played on Canadian soil. Vancouver will host 7 matches, including round of 32 and round of 16 fixtures, with 2 of Canada's group stage games there as well. For a country that has historically watched World Cups from the outside, looking in, and one where soccer has long been described as the fastest growing sport in the nation, the symbolic weight of hosting is difficult to overstate. Canada's men's national team last qualified for the World Cup back in 1986. That is a gap of 40 years. The idea of those players walking onto home turf in front of their own fans for the first time in 4 decades carries genuine emotional force. The economic projections are significant, though credible economists are careful to frame them honestly. Analysts projected the World Cup would produce a measurable lift in Canada's GDP, driven by tourism and hospitality spending, with gains from international tourism estimated between $1 billion and $5 billion, and increased domestic spending estimated between $500 million and $1.5 billion. Chief economist Doug Porter was direct in noting that the real-world impact tends to be relatively modest and represents a short-lived spending bump rather than a structural transformation. FIFA's own commissioned assessment was more optimistic, estimating that preparing for and hosting the World Cup will contribute up to 3.8 billion Canadian dollars in positive economic output, including 2 billion Canadian dollars added to GDP, 1.3 billion Canadian dollars in labor income, 700 million Canadian dollars in government revenue, and the creation and preservation of 24,100 jobs. British Columbia's government projected the event would generate more than $1 billion in tourism revenue in the 5 years following the Games. The legacy argument that hosting puts Vancouver on a global map in ways that pay dividends long after the final whistle. But a Globe and Mail investigation into the host city agreements adds a crucial counterweight. The contracts all host cities were required to sign reveal how this tournament manages to be fabulously profitable and remarkably low risk for FIFA. Broadcasting rights, sponsorships, and the bulk of hospitality income flow back to Zurich. Governments absorb most of the practical cost and financial risk. Projected revenues for the 2026 Men's World Cup run above $13 billion, but host cities do not share meaningfully in that revenue. Instead, they pick up the tab for stadium upgrades, security operations, fan zones, transport adaptations, and public space renovations. Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed that Canada will spend just over $1 billion in total to host the World Cup, with contributions from all levels of government and a federal share expected to reach $473 million. That works out to an average of $82 million per match, for a tournament whose global revenue flows back to Switzerland. Toronto and Vancouver have also recorded some of the steepest cost overruns of any host city in the tournament, driven by inflation, FIFA-mandated upgrades, temporary seating expansions, and sharply higher security requirements than originally estimated. And yet, the dysfunction in the U.S. portion of the tournament may be driving more international traffic, more media attention, and more sympathetic global perception toward the Canadian host cities than anyone originally anticipated. The German fan who decides to fly to Toronto rather than New Jersey is not an abstraction. He represents a real segment of the global soccer audience recalibrating travel plans in real time, pushed not by any Canadian marketing campaign, but by American political conditions. The ticketing crisis has also played out differently in Canada. Ontario's legislative response was unusually direct. Ontario law bans individuals and platforms from reselling event tickets above their original face value. After that price cap came into force, FIFA's resale marketplace for Toronto World Cup tickets was pulled from the platform entirely. This is precisely the kind of consumer protection intervention FIFA has resisted in other markets, and Ontario forced it through by making non-compliance a formal legal matter. As of June 10th, 2 days before Toronto's first World Cup match, the maximum administrative penalty for illegal ticket resale in Ontario is $25,000 for repeat offenders. Premier Doug Ford put it plainly, "I have no problem with companies making a profit. I have a problem with monopolies and gouging the average citizen who can't bring their kids to a game." The province went further. Ontario warned FIFA directly that it could face a fine of up to $250,000 for non-compliance with its resale legislation after observing that some tickets for Canada's match against Bosnia and Herzegovina were listed on FIFA's own platform above face value. A provincial government issuing a $250,000 warning to the global governing body of soccer 1 week before the World Cup begins on its soil is not a routine regulatory moment. It is a signal that Canada is not simply deferring to FIFA's commercial authority. The practical challenge for Toronto is that the ticketing scandals have not produced sold-out stadiums. In a tournament defined by what FIFA claimed was demand for over 500 million tickets against only 6 to 7 million available, thousands of seats for Toronto's matches remain unsold as the countdown accelerates. One soccer commentator described the situation as the biggest tournament on earth, leaving Toronto's dedicated fan base out in the cold, priced out by a system that simultaneously claims historic demand. That paradox, unaffordable and unsold at the same time, is the purest expression of what the FIFA ticketing scandal actually is. It is not a supply and demand failure. It is a pricing philosophy failure. When you abandon price caps in the name of market efficiency and then use dynamic pricing, opaque availability signals, and layered resale platforms to extract maximum revenue from every seat, you can simultaneously produce visible empty sections in a globally watched tournament while publicly claiming to have received 500 million ticket requests. The seats are not unsold because fans don't want them. They are unsold because fans cannot afford them. And in the city that passed the strongest anti-scalping law in North America, specifically to address this problem, the root cause, FIFA's primary pricing decisions, remains entirely untouched by that legislation. Some resale tickets to Vancouver and Toronto matches have still sold for tens of thousands of dollars on secondary platforms. A Vancouver family of 3 found themselves completely priced out. The tickets we can find are around $800 to $1,000 per person, and we are a family of 3. The cost of access to what FIFA is marketing as a shared global celebration of soccer is, in Canada's host cities, roughly equivalent to a month's rent. That is not a coincidence of market conditions. It is the consequence of a governing body that has decided the World Cup's commercial ceiling matters more than its civic promise. What makes Canada's position genuinely complicated and genuinely worth watching is that it is simultaneously a beneficiary and a victim of the same systemic failure. Canada benefits from the United States' political inhospitability to international fans, from the immigration apparatus steering European supporters and fans from the global South toward Canadian venues, and from the general sense that Toronto and Vancouver are safer, more legally accountable, more welcoming places to watch a match than American cities where federal immigration enforcement is a background presence at public events. Canada also benefits from its own national team's participation, and from the historic fact that, for the first time in 40 years, A men's World Cup match will be played on Canadian soil. But Canada is also in part a co-author of its own frustrations. Its host city agreements cede revenue control to Zurich. Its stadiums are running over budget. Its fans are being priced out by a system. Ontario is fighting with escalating fines, while FIFA continues to test whether the enforcement is serious. And Canada's most high-profile ticketing story in the week before the tournament is not the tale of a nation's soccer finally arriving on the world stage. It is the story of 60 fans who thought they had gotten free seats and are now receiving 7-day payment ultimatums. And yet, the world is coming. The cameras are coming. 48 nations are coming. In a tournament where the majority host country has given the international community 100 reasons to be uneasy, Canada has simply had to be its normal, reliably governed, rule of law self. And in this particular political moment, that turns out to be a competitive advantage that nobody specifically planned for. The deeper lesson here is not really about soccer. It is about what happens when a global governing body with enormous commercial power operates inside a political environment that has removed the usual guardrails of diplomatic predictability. FIFA built its 2026 infrastructure on the assumption that the United States would be what it has always been, a large, open, commercially aggressive, but fundamentally welcoming host. That assumption is no longer valid, and FIFA has no contingency plan for a world where its primary host country is issuing travel bans to fans of 4 of its own qualified teams, where former FIFA presidents are publicly advising people to stay away, where state attorneys general are issuing subpoenas, and where FIFA's own ticketing platform glitched out free seats to Toronto matches and then demanded the money back 5 days before the opening kickoff. Canada did not create this situation, but Canada is positioned to outlast it. And in the strange geometry of 2026, that is what it means to hit the jackpot at a World Cup that hasn't even started yet.